You need to run to watch this documentary that came out today. Mark my words. Everybody is going to be talking about this. This completely changes the way that true crime is told, and it is like watching a real-life horror movie. This follows a community in Florida where the neighbors are not getting along with each other, and over 2 years, body cam footage from police being called to the neighborhood is recorded, and this ends very badly. If you love documentaries, hit follow because I post daily and you'll never miss out on what's new. This entire documentary is only body cam footage and recordings from the actual time of events. Most true crime documentaries are people retelling the story of something that happened, whereas this one, you literally get to watch it while it happens. There is no disputing the things that these people say to each other and the interactions that are had, and in hindsight, it is very creepy. And it is extremely powerful because without saying anything, it is saying more than any other true crime documentary I've seen. Let me know what you think about this in the comments.
I sentence you to life in prison. 114 stab wounds, 49 defensive wounds, 35 wounds to the head and neck, 29 to the back and shoulder, and 6 fatal wounds. This court has reviewed and seen more than its fair share of autopsy photos. The autopsy photos in this particular case were particularly difficult. The 49 defensive wounds indicate that Tristan Bailey was conscious, she was aware, she was doing everything she could to fend off this attack. She suffered a painful, horrifying death from someone that she trusted. Her screams were most likely stifled by her own suffocating lungs. He lured her into a secluded place in the woods near his home, a person that she trusted, and he led her there under false pretenses.
This is the most dangerous girl in the United States, and the crimes she committed will leave you in shock. Emily, a girl of just 16 years old, caught the attention of Mark, an employee at a small pharmacy in Houston. Every day she appeared with a large backpack on her back, and her repetitive behavior quickly sparked Mark's curiosity. He started wondering what Emily was buying so frequently. One day, he decided to observe her discreetly, and that's when he noticed something strange. Emily always grabbed multiple packs of wet wipes. No girl her age would have a reason to use so many wipes. Every day, with a growing feeling that something was wrong, Mark decided to follow Emily. After she left the pharmacy, she walked about 15 minutes until she stopped in an isolated area far from any activity. Mark approached silently, and what he saw was so disturbing that he didn't think twice before calling the police. Emily was arrested immediately, but on the day of the trial, she revealed something that left everyone in shock. What she was doing with those wet wipes is absolutely terrifying. Follow me and comment "arrest" for part 2.
The video I just showed you allegedly depicts the death of this man, Hugo Figueroa. Hugo was the nephew of famous Mexican singer Joan Sebastian, and Hugo was a rising name in the music industry in Mexico. About a year ago, when Hugo was traveling in Mexico, he was suddenly approached by 7 armed men in a place called Plaza de Toros, or La Aurora. Now, allegedly, the men that kidnapped Hugo were from the Los Viagras cartel, and it's been suspected that Hugo himself had ties to their rival cartel, the CJNG. There's more video that was released of Hugo's abduction that's simply too disturbing to show on TikTok, where masked men tell him you're not at home anymore, don't mess with the people of the hills, and they keep telling him to shut up and threatening him. Shortly afterwards, Hugo's dead body was found on the side of the road in an area close by. It's unknown exactly what Hugo was killed for, but this is just yet another reason why, if you already don't understand why, you do not mess with the Mexican cartels. And if you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to my podcast, Murder in America, that I co-host with my wife, Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms.
I can't believe somebody would just do that to me. They stripped her naked, beat her, stuffed wooden sticks into pants and throat, and choked her neck with her shirt. One of the boys was still urinating at the girl, while the other children held her down, making it impossible for her to resist, and her mother has stated that her young daughter has suffered a mental trauma that will never heal.
She was screaming. When she woke up, she said they killed me. She thought she was dead.
This is the most heartbreaking case I have ever encountered. A 5-year-old girl was S.A. and brutally abused by 3 children as young as 8 or 9 years old, and then abandoned in a field. You can never imagine how terrifying they were. That night, she suddenly received a call from her cousin claiming that her daughter was missing. She went out to look for her and met 2 children, around 8 or 9 years old, who were playing. They both said they had never seen Anne-Marie. Subsequently, they reported to the police. However, at this moment, the 2 children she had met before and their mother took the initiative to find Antavia, saying that they actually knew where her daughter was and took her to a field where her daughter was lying there. The authorities claimed that 3 children aged between 8 and 10 were involved in the incident. They took the initiative to approach the girl, acted very friendly, and held her hand, luring her to the field.
Kata Scott has been missing for 2 weeks, and the more we learn about her accused kidnapper, the more urgent her search becomes. On the morning of October 5th, Kim and Kevin Scott realized that their daughter Kata never made it home from her overnight shift at a senior living facility, and this was really unlike her. Kim calls Kata, but her phone goes to voicemail over and over again. She decides to call the facility, and she gets conflicting stories. One person tells her that the last time they saw her was at the end of her shift at 6 in the morning, and the other person says that they last saw her at the beginning of the shift at around 10:30 to 10:45 at night. Growing worried, her parents decide to call the police, and they all meet back up at the facility. They found that her car was still in the parking lot, but her keys, her iPad, her phone, and other belongings were all missing. They also learned that there's no cameras in the parking lot, so there's no way to see what happened to her. And her family's worry only grew because days before her disappearance, Kata was receiving harassing phone calls from somebody that they didn't know. Police are able to track her phone, and they learn that the last person she was in contact before disappearing was 21-year-old Keon King. At this point, we learned that Keon has a pattern and a criminal record to go with it. Earlier this year, he was arrested for the kidnapping of another woman, but the charges were dropped after she did not appear in court to testify. We also learned that a third woman filed a protection from abuse order against him. There was also a TikTok video of Keon peering through a woman's window, and we learned that it's part of the case that is now being refiled. They also learned that her phone last pinged at the 55-acre Aubrey Arboretum, which is about 10 minutes from her workplace, but it's still unknown if police found anything here. By this point, the FBI and Philadelphia homicide detectives joined the case. According to her dad, it's not because they're treating her case as a homicide, but because they want all hands on deck to find her. 10 days after her disappearance, Keon King surrendered himself to police. They immediately started searching for his car, believing that Kata must have been in it at some point. Police receive a tip to an abandoned middle school. Here they find a phone case, glasses, and a card with Kata's name on it. However, there's no sign of Kata herself. Around this time, they find his car in East Falls, and at the time, it's still being processed for evidence. Keon King is now being charged with Kata's disappearance, as well as imprisonment, stalking, and other charges. Authorities have also refiled those original kidnapping charges against him from earlier this year. Kata's family urges anyone with information to please come forward. They've also set up a GoFundMe to help pay for search efforts.
She boiled her husband and ate him. Omaima Ari Nelson was born in 1968 in Cairo, Egypt. At age 6, she underwent female genital mutilation, a procedure involving removal of the clitoris without anesthesia, leaving lasting physical and psychological trauma. In 1986, she moved to the US after marrying Roger Stainbrook. The marriage ended, and she later lived in Southern California, working as a nanny and part-time model. She had a criminal record for theft, assault, and violent behavior during sex. In October 1991, Omaima met 56-year-old William Bill Nelson, a former pilot and convicted drug smuggler. They allegedly married weeks later on November 1st in a private Egyptian-style ceremony. By Thanksgiving weekend on November 28, 1991, their relationship took a deadly turn. During what Omaima later described as a bondage sex session, she claimed Bill raped her. She retaliated by striking him with a lamp, stabbing him with scissors, and bludgeoning him with an iron. after killing him, Omaima dismembered his body, including castrating him, in their Costa Mesa apartment. According to her confession, Omaima claimed she boiled her husband's head and even cooked his ribs in barbecue sauce. Though she later denied cannibalizing him, neighbors recalled hearing the garbage disposal running for hours as she allegedly tried to grind up bone and tissue. In the days after the murder, Omaima tried to recruit help from ex-boyfriends to dispose of the body, offering money in return. One of them, 27-year-old Jose Esquivel, alerted authorities. When police searched her apartment on December 2, 1991, they uncovered the grisly remains and arrested her. The scene shocked even seasoned detectives. Police later discovered his decapitated head in the freezer, hands cooking in oil, and various body parts stored in containers throughout the apartment. Omaima Nelson's trial began on December 1, 1992. The defense argued that Omaima was a victim of years of abuse and acted in self-defense. Psychiatrists diagnosed her with PTSD and borderline personality disorder. Prosecutors argued she killed for financial gain and tried to cover it up, pointing to her calculated dismemberment and cover-up. She was convicted of second-degree murder on January 12, 1993, and sentenced to 27 years to life that March. Her 1995 appeal was denied. She served time in multiple California prisons and was denied parole in 2006 and 2011. In prison, she became a born-again Christian and married a disabled man via correspondence, receiving conjugal visits until his death in 2008. As of June 2025, Nelson remains incarcerated and is eligible for parole in 2026. Her case remains one of the most infamous examples of domestic homicide and alleged cannibalism in U.S. history.
So check this crazy ass loophole I just went through. I nutted in the condom. Put water in the condom. Okay? Then, you want to take it a step further? Put the condom over a light. At that point, you're going to see a homemade lava lamp. Not gabbing though.
One person disappearing in the woods is already terrifying enough, but now you have 5 young boys, all mysteriously vanish while hunting for salamander eggs. They knew the area really well as it was close to their neighborhood, but still, they somehow disappeared into thin air. And nobody would have any clue as to what happened until all 5 of their bodies were discovered 11 years later. What's really eerie though is that they were found in an area that had already been thoroughly searched. Let's talk about one of South Korea's most disturbing and unsolved cases, aka the disappearance and murder of the Frog Boys. So on March 26, 1991, 5 young boys and best friends disappeared near Mount Woryong. The boys were between the ages of 9 and 13, and their names were Kim Jong-sik, Jo Hoo-yin, Kim Young-yu, Park Chun-in, and Woo Chul-won. They all lived in the Dalseo district of Daegu, South Korea, and back then life was really simple. They all loved just hanging out and being boys together, and one of their favorite things to do was go and hunt for salamander eggs on Mount Woryong. This was a really popular activity for all the kids, and they did it so often that they knew the area pretty much like the back of their hands. And it also helped because it wasn't too far away from their homes. So that day, March 26, 1991, it was a public holiday in South Korea. It marked the day that the first local elections were held since the fall of the country's military dictatorship in December of 1987. So because it was a holiday, none of the kids had school. Instead, they all got together and told their parents that they were headed to Mount Woryong to see if they could find any salamander eggs in the streams. They said they would be back before noon, but sadly, they never made it back home. When they never came back, their parents immediately reported them missing to the police. Since it was a major holiday, the news really didn't pick up on the boys' disappearance at first, which ultimately hindered the investigation. But within a week, a massive search was launched. Like, this was huge. It was the largest search in South Korean history, which involved nearly 300,000 police officers and military troops, as well as volunteers. Every search was then broadcast on live television. And what breaks my heart is that all 5 of the boys' dads quit their job to search the entire country for their children. Since Mount Woryong was the place they were last known to be, it was extensively searched as well, literally over 500 times. Every single spot on that mountain was searched. The disappearance of these 5 kids gained national attention, and quickly, and over 2 million missing person flyers were distributed. Authorities expanded their search efforts to 140,000 other locations, but oddly enough, no trace of the boys were found. It was like they vanished into thin thin air. Nobody could explain what happened to these little boys. They were just gone. They became known as the Frog Boys in the media, which is weird because they were out hunting for salamander eggs that day. But they became known as the Frog Boys because an early report incorrectly stated that they were out hunting for frog eggs, and I guess this name kind of just stuck. In the weeks following their disappearance, the boys' parents were treated horribly. They received fake ransom calls claiming that the boys were all being held hostage for money. They also got horrible fake phone calls from people pretending to be their children. But the most disturbing thing of all is that a fraudulent psychologist inserted himself into the investigation, and he tried to convince everyone, including the police, that the father of Kim Jong-sik had killed all of the boys and hid their bodies underneath his home. This psychologist literally had no proof of this, he just wanted some attention. But because of his claim, the police actually went and tore up his home looking for the boys. But not so shockingly, they found nothing. So in the midst of absolute heartbreak and grief, his home was destroyed over this fake claim that he killed his own child and all of his friends. He died not long after his home was destroyed, and according to his family and friends, he died from a broken heart and stress. So then the families were all left with no answers, and just as his case was starting to become cold, a horrifying discovery was made. On September 26, 2002, well over 11 years after the boys went missing, a couple of hikers stumbled across a pile of bones. They were hiking near the base of Mount Wuryong scavenging for acorns when they made this horrific discovery. So police were obviously called, who then discovered more bones. After DNA testing, it was confirmed that these were the remains of all 5 of the boys. They were all neatly buried in a shallow pit about half a mile from the road, and sadly, this was only 2.5 miles from their home. All this time, they were right there, but what's weird is that this specific area had already been searched numerous times. Surrounding the boys were a bunch of rusted bullets and other metal objects. Some of the bullets were spent, but there were also several unfired bullets too, including tangled up in some of the boys' clothes, which brings me to my next point. Some of the boys' bodies were found almost contorted or buried in a strange position. It was reported that one of their torsos was found above their shoulders, and what's odd is that all of their clothes were tied in tight knots together, and some of those unfired rusted bullets were found in one of the boys' underwear. So right off the bat, this definitely screams foul play. Police initially just tried saying that all 5 of the boys just died of hypothermia. The parents, on the other hand, were not buying this, and they demanded a full investigation, but also because their remains were located a really short distance from a nearby village that they all knew really well. So to their families, it made no sense why or how they could have just died of hypothermia instead of just going to get help, which was right there. Police said they died of hypothermia because it was a really rainy and cold day when they disappeared, but their autopsies show otherwise. 3 of the boys' skulls showed signs of blunt force trauma, possibly from the metal objects that were found buried with them. The other 2 of their skulls had a small hole in them, which was reportedly so small that it couldn't be identified how they got it. Some think those holes could have been gunshot wounds since there were bullets surrounding them, but this has never been confirmed. The medical examiner stated that the condition and the position of their bodies indicated that they were buried immediately after they died, because otherwise animal activity would have been present, which it wasn't. So police quickly changed their manner of death to homicide and continued investigating. But because of how many years had passed, what little evidence was left behind proved to be unhelpful. As of today, their disappearance and murder remains unsolved, despite finding them after so many years. And although we don't really know what happened to the Frog Boys, there are a few theories. Theory number 1 is that they were lured to Mount Wuryong by someone that they knew, someone they trusted, and once out there all alone, they were killed for some unknown reason. Police believe that whoever did this knew the terrain really well though. Theory number 2, and really the only other theory, is that the South Korean military was involved. I know this sounds a little out there, but there's actually quite a bit of evidence suggesting they could be involved. Okay, so the boys disappeared in an area on Mount Wuryong that was close to the military base. Some people believe that they were conducting a shooting practice that day and accidentally shot and killed one of the boys. And in a panic, they killed the other 4 and buried them to cover it all up. The military has come out and said that since that day was a holiday, no training or shooting practice was scheduled. And they also initially denied that any of their officers were out firing that day. But years later, an officer reportedly admitted that the bullets found in one of the little boys' clothes came from their shooting range. And what's also odd is that in the months following the boys' disappearance, before they were found, all of the boys' families got a call in the middle of the night from a military official. This official wanted them all to come out to the base despite it being at night, so they did. When they were all there, the military official told them that he could give a power to one of the parents to help them find their children. What makes people believe this theory, that the military was involved, was where the boys were eventually found. They were found at the base of the mountain, not far from the military base itself. This most definitely was a spot that was thoroughly searched multiple times, so it begs the question, why weren't they found sooner. Evidence points to them having been buried right after they died, not sometime later, which means they were there the entire 11 years. This has made people, including the boys' families, believe that the police were helping cover up the situation to protect the military. And one thing that kind of fuels the speculation is the fact that the police never interviewed any of the military officials that day. The families have publicly criticized the police for the way they handled this. According to them, authorities never even interviewed key witnesses in this case, one of which was a 4th grader who was in the area the day the boys disappeared. The boy reportedly heard a horrendous scream coming from the mountain, and he tried telling police, but no one ever officially interviewed him. So those are the two main theories in this case, but as of today, it remains unsolved. I guess the only good thing to come out of this is the abolition of the statute of limitations for murder in South Korea. In 2006, the South Korean statute of limitations for murder was only 15 years. So if you committed a murder and somehow got away with it for 15 years, you wouldn't be able to be charged for it if you were ever found past that point. But thanks to high-profile cold cases just like this one, and with pressure from the public, this was abolished in 2015. It's just so scary to me how you can disappear like this and not be found for decades, even though the entire time you were right there, in an area that has been thoroughly searched, literally 2 miles from your home in this case. It's just sad, and I hope that one day these boys get justice. But it's now been 34 years, and whatever happened to these boys out on that mountain remains a mystery, and whoever did this to them is still out there.
So this was an Australian cult called The Family, and this cult liked to steal babies. The cult stole 28 babies, and I can almost guarantee you, I think I might be even confident in promising you, that you have never heard of a cult more insane than this one. Anne Hamilton, she was actually born Evelyn Grace Victoria Edwards. She later changes her name, but she was the oldest of 7 kids to her parents, and they grew up in the town of Sale in Australia. Her father did nothing. He was very distant from the family, constantly in and out of the picture, and her mother was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, so she was always in and out of hospital. So both parents overall were pretty absent. In her early 20s in 1941, Anne married a man called Lionel Harris, and they moved into a cute house together, had a baby, settled down. It was in 1955 when the family decided that they wanted another baby, but this time they wanted to adopt one. So 1955, on the way to go pick up this baby to adopt, Anne's husband gets in a terrible car accident and he passes away. And in what felt like 2 seconds, Anne lost not only her husband, but also the child they were going to adopt, because after the car accident, the adoption facility did not want this baby to be adopted by a single parent. And it was following that everything changed for Anne. She changed her name, changed her lifestyle, changed her hobbies, and basically transformed herself into this new person. She became obsessed with yoga, eventually opened up her own studio, teaching mainly middle-aged women, but her practice was different because she started mixing in spiritual and philosophical teachings, mixing Hindu and Christian ideas and beliefs while also preaching about supernatural beliefs and practices. Like, it got to the point that in her studio, while she was teaching yoga, they would play around with Ouija boards. It was like to that level. In class, they would also talk about marital problems, and Anne would encourage her students, I guess, I don't really know what to call them. She would encourage them to leave their husbands, and the women would. They would leave their husbands, they would move out of their house and move in with Anne, pretty much starting to create this little cult of hers. So Anne starts thinking, oh wow, I really do have a lot of influence over these women. They kind of believe everything that I say, and I kind of love that, and I want more of it. In 1962, Anne realized that to create growing her cult, she needed more power, she needed more control, and what was the easiest way for her to get that? In her head, she thought, I need a powerful man. I need someone who is intelligent, who has the right connections, knows the right people, and has a lot of influence over other powerful men. Raynor Johnson, he was a perfect guy. He was intelligent, he had a PhD in physics, he was high up at his job at the University of London, he had the right connections with respected professors, politicians, doctors, lawyers, and teachers, and most importantly, like Anne, he also had a big interest in the paranormal spiritual world. Raynor was married with children, and something that you need to know about Anne is that she was very intentional with everything that she did. It was always very calculated. So she went out and started looking for people who knew Raynor, who could give her information about him, and then she showed up to Raynor's house. She knocked on his door and told him that she could predict the future, and then she started throwing out all of these facts that she knew about him that she gathered from information from other people. And Raynor obviously doesn't know that she has done that, so he's listening to her and he's thinking, oh oh wow, this woman can predict the future, because how else would she have so much information about me and or my life? So in 1963, Raynor, his wife, and his children fully commit to Anne and her cult, and this is pretty much when the cult is officially created. And now the main goal is to keep on recruiting people. So Raynor would talk to his businessmen friends and he would say, guess what? There's this lady, she teaches yoga, her classes are amazing, she's incredible, she can predict the future, she also has supernatural powers, and she's just amazing, so you should get your wife to go to her yoga classes. And the men would get their wives to go. And slowly but surely this cult starts growing, and Anne continues teaching yoga, but in reality she's just kind of teaching nonsense, telling her, I guess now cult members, all about how she is Jesus Christ, how she has all these powers, about how the end of the world is coming, but if they stay with her in her cult, she will be able to save them when that day comes. And one of her favorite things to talk about was about how she was so powerful that she never aged, she never got older. This was her claim, and she would lie to her cult members about how old she really was. She would lie about her age, and then she would secretly go and get facelifts to surgically pull up her face to avoid wrinkles so that her followers would really believe that she didn't age. No offense, but that's why her hairline is so far back, because this was in the 60s and she got a handful of facelifts done and her hairline just kept getting further pushed back further and further every time. So there's that. But Anne and Raynor decide that it's time to name the cult, and are you ready to hear the name they picked out? They named it the Great White Brotherhood. Yeah, I don't really know how they came up with that one, but they did. More and more people of power keep joining the Great White Brotherhood. And again, this was a very calculated move for Anne because she uses that to her advantage. So for example, some of these were doctors, and she would get these doctors to get her substances so she could feed to the other cult members to make it easier to brainwash them, because they would start to hallucinate and then they would believe everything that was coming out of Anne's mouth. That was only one of the things that she did with the substances, but secondly, she would use these substances to purposefully make her members very ill without their knowledge, and then she would stop giving them the substances and then they would get better, and she would claim that she healed them because she has healing powers, because she was the female reincarnation version of Jesus Christ. One of the doctors that Anne met was an older lady named Joy, and Joy was the owner of a psychiatric hospital. Anne managed to brainwash her, and when Joy passed away, in her will, she left her psychiatric hospital to Anne. Do you see where this is going? Because you hear this and you probably think, this is insane. It's so easy to say, well, why didn't the cult members just leave? If they didn't want to be a part of the cult anymore, why did they not just walk away? And the answer to that is that they could not. Usually it's already so difficult to try and leave a cult in the first place, but in this case, Anne made it 10 times harder. Because if someone talked about leaving or threatened to leave, Anne would say that they were crazy, and she would get doctors, members of her cult, to sign off on papers to admit that person to her psychiatric hospital against their will. Yeah, if you want to leave, too bad. Anne is going to convince everyone that you've lost your mind, that you've gone crazy. You will get sent to the hospital where people will think that you're crazy. You will be fed medications and substances that you do not need. You will be given treatments that you don't need, sometimes even surgical procedures, full-on surgeries that they did not need, until they eventually started to really lose their minds a little bit. And she didn't only do this with cult members, she actually did it anytime that it was convenient for her. In 1968, Anne meets a man called Bill Byrne, and she falls in love. She wants to marry him. However, Bill is married, he has a wife, but he does really also take a liking to Anne. So what does Anne do? She gets her cult member doctors to sign off on papers to get Bill's wife admitted to the psychiatric hospital against her will, and just like that, she's now out of the picture. And her and Bill start dating, and then they get married, and this cult just continues to grow. We don't know exactly how many people were in the cult at its peak, but we know that it was at least 500 people. 500 people brainwashed, manipulated, and completely underneath Anne's control. Back in 1962, Anne had purchased a house in Ferny Creek, and to keep control of this cult, she obviously wants them to all be as close together as possible. So her followers start purchasing homes in the same area right next to Anne's. One person does, and then another, and then another, and then another. And it's so sick and twisted, but they slowly pretty much start building this little community of their own. And her followers, some were doctors, other were lawyers. They were well-respected people and they had money, and Anne wants more power, more control. So then she makes it a rule that every follower or member, whatever you want to call them, everyone had to give 10% of the money that they made to Anne. And it got to a point that she was worth $50 million because she was collecting money from so many people. She buys a house in New York, she buys a house in London, she buys a house in Hawaii because she could afford it. Now we get to the point of the story in which the cult begins stealing babies. babies, because remember, Anne claimed that the end of the world was coming, and when it did, everyone and everything would be wiped off the earth, but her and her cult members, they would be okay, because remember, she is Jesus Christ herself, and she would be able to save them. However, afterwards, they would have to recreate their own population of people, so they needed to prepare for that. So in the early 1970s, Anne changes the name of the cult to the Family. And first, of course, just flat out takes any baby that is born within the cult. If a cult member was living with them and they were pregnant, Anne would just take the baby after they gave birth and just say that it was hers. But not only that, she would also put her psychiatric hospital to use yet again. When a patient would be pregnant, the doctors would help the woman give birth, and immediately after, as soon as that baby was born, the mother's eyes would be covered with a pillow so she could never even see her baby. And then the baby would be removed, taken, and stolen by Anne. And afterwards, the members in the cult that were lawyers would forge birth certificates and list Anne as the biological mother. Anne Hamilton stole 14 babies from her psychiatric hospital and 14 from her cult members, adding up to a total of 28 stolen babies. All of those children would be raised to believe that Anne was their biological mother, even if their real mother was in the cult, coexisting with them, watching them grow up. Oftentimes as well, to avoid questions, Anne would walk around for months wearing a fake pregnancy belly, pretending that she was pregnant so that people wouldn't be confused when she showed up out of nowhere with a newborn baby. And when she would show up with 3 new babies, she would just say that she gave birth to triplets. She would also dye the children's hair bright blonde so they would look more alike, to further make people believe that they really were siblings. 28 children were born into the cult of the Family, and Anne bought yet another house that was isolated and bigger to be able to raise these children in. And she would also have what she called aunties helping her raise these kids, because of course she didn't want to do it on her own. She kind of wanted to push that responsibilities to somebody else, and sometimes those aunties would be the children's real mothers, but they had no idea. I mean, the moms knew obviously, but the children had no idea that they were being raised by this auntie, when in reality she was literally their real mom. The way those children were treated is horrific. It is truly inhumane, and of course there were rules that they had to follow, and if they didn't, they would be punished. I'll talk about some of the rules first, and then we'll go into some of the punishments. But the kids always had to wake up at 5 in the morning. First thing in the morning, they would be weighed to make sure that they were not gaining weight. Mind you, these are children. They had to practice 1 hour of yoga. They had to listen to Anne's preachings on tape. They had to chant. They had to meditate. They had to do physical exercise. All of that they had to do before they were allowed to eat breakfast. And then they would do more exercise, more meditation, more chants, and then schoolwork. The kids were not allowed to speak unless they were specifically given permission. They also had strict rules, first of all, on who they could or couldn't speak to, as well as on what exact times they would be allowed to use the bathroom. The children were only given basically enough food to barely stay alive. This included pieces of fruit and steamed vegetables. And if they misbehaved or failed to follow the rules, then they would be punished. And I want to make it clear that misbehaving was whatever Anne would decide it to be. So for example, if one of the babies was not allowed to use the bathroom at a certain time, but they needed to use the bathroom so they went in their pants, that would be considered misbehaving. Or if a child gained weight, mind you, these are growing children, they are young, they're obviously going to be gaining weight, but if they did, that would be considered breaking a rule. Oh, and also, by the way, these rules would be changed every single day, so the kids would be breaking the rules without even knowing that it was a rule to begin with, because that rule was created that same day. But some of the punishments included being restricted from food and water for days, to the point that kids would sometimes eat plants and grass because they got to be so hungry. They would be given ice cold baths, their heads would be placed under water, their hands would be placed on open flames, and the children as well as the adults would be given substances to the point where some of them would sit on the ground and stare at nothing for hours because they were so out of it. There were also other physical punishments that I'm not going to go into detail about, but just to give you an idea, one of the kids had the nickname Zebra Stripes because he had so many scars and markings from the punishments that he endured. And when one of them was being punished, all of the others were forced to watch, and if they looked away, then they would be punished next. This cult was operating from the early 1960s into the 1980s, but soon, finally, things would come crashing down for Anne. And the reason why actually came from within the cult, because some of the adults started wanting to leave the cult, and there was only so much that Anne could do to try and stop them, but a few of them did manage to leave, and some of those would begin talking to the media a little bit about this mysterious cult and what their experiences were like. And the kids as well were growing up. The oldest kids were teenagers, teenagers at this point, and these teenagers had grown up under Anne's control. It was all that they knew, but the older that they got, the more they began to rebel, sneaking out of the compound at night and going and talking to real people in the real world. The public was slowly but surely catching on, and the people were so suspicious about what Anne was really doing, and it got to the point where one time police officers were sent out to investigate. However, there was one tiny little room in the house that was dug out, like a space behind the wall, and Anne called it the hole. When officers showed up, the children were put inside. They had to crawl inside of this hole and told to be quiet. They were crammed in there, piled on top of each other, frozen in fear. The way that you would enter this hole was through a tiny hole in the wall, and that was covered up by a painting. Like, you would never be able to see it. If you didn't know that it was there, you would never guess. So when officers showed up, the children were put in the hole. Officers didn't see any children, so they just left. However, it would not be long before the two oldest girls, one girl named Sarah and one girl named Leanne, would go and sneak out, go to the police, and tell them everything. With their courage and the courage of others who managed to escape, investigators finally had enough to act. And on the morning of August 14th in 1987, police officers showed up to the compound and completely raided it. The children were so scared, they were terrified, but they were finally safe, and the aunties were arrested. The children were taken to the hospital to get the medical care that they desperately needed, and it makes me so happy to say that all of them were kept together as they were being treated and helped and taught how to basically function as a normal human being. And it took a long time, obviously a lot of time and a lot of patience and a lot of help, but thankfully the children were okay. They managed to pick themselves back up, and they were able to learn everything they had missed out on their whole lives from being isolated, and they turned their lives around. The psychiatric hospital was shut down. The doctors that played a part in this entire thing were obviously forced to surrender their licenses. Anne, however, at the time was in New York, and after learning of the raid, she went into hiding with Bill. The raid happened in 1987. Anne and Bill hid overseas until 1993, which is crazy, but they were eventually found and arrested, and this is gonna make you guys so angry. When Anne was finally caught, people were expecting her to face serious charges because she had illegally taken babies, forged documents, and subjected children to years of cruelty. But when prosecutors were beginning to build up this case, they ran into a problem that most of what Anne had done had happened decades earlier, and at the time there were not clear laws in place to cover what she had done. For example, the children were brought into the family because they were stolen. Doctors and lawyers loyal to Anne helped her falsify birth certificates and adoption papers. That was illegal, but proving exactly who did what and being able to tie that directly to Anne in court was proving to be extremely difficult. The kids had been moved around, paperwork was either hidden or destroyed, and some witnesses that were still loyal to Anne still refused to talk. Because of that, the only thing that prosecutors could prove were fraud-related charges, aka falsifying documents and making false declarations in order to obtain the children. So in 1994, Anne pled guilty to making a false declaration, and she was fined $5,000. Other members within her inner circle also faced similar fraud charges, but that was it. That was it. I'm not even kidding you. She had to pay $5,000 and then she was free to walk. Guys, this lady had $50 million. She had to give $5,000 and then that was it. Like, I'm sorry, what do you actually mean? Yeah, insane for literally so many reasons. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts. That is all I have for today's video. This was probably a pretty lengthy one, so let me know if you made it to the end, but thank you guys for spending time with me today. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
Oh yeah, one more thing. If y'all see me on Love Island, mind your fucking business, bitch. I'm trying to find love, bitch. Y'all had y'all motherfucking chance.
Mike, I told you my name, Josh Armstrong. This is Kyle Peck, okay? We're both with the Flying Police Department. You were in the back of that patrol car for a long time. Is your legs okay? They get on asleep?
My right one's still trying, but I'm okay. I'm not stand up anymore. So
You can, if you need to stand up, just tell me you need to stand up, okay? I'm going to let you read this at the same time I read it, okay? It says you have the right to remain silent, not make any statement at all. Anything you say can and will be used against you at your trial. You have the right to terminate this interview at any time. Do you understand each of these rights, Mike?
I understand everything the rest of it. Yeah, I understand this.
Okay. Well, we can answer any questions you have here in just a minute, okay? And you said you do understand your rights? Okay, and with your rights in mind, you want to speak with me now?
I don't know if I need a lawyer. I don't know.
That's a complete personal decision on yours, Mike. I just need to make sure that you do understand your rights, and then if you want a lawyer, you can let me know and we can get you one. And obviously I think you've got some questions that you were trying to ask me a minute ago.
Yeah, but I don't want to be arrested, so I feel like I need somebody to help me with what's going on, because I don't have any idea what's going on.
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, neither one of us have an idea of what's going on right now either, because we haven't spoke with you yet, if that makes sense.
It does.
So we really don't know. We don't know what's going on. I think our hope was that you would help us figure out what's going on as much as us help you figure out what's going on.
Try, but I don't know what happened.
You sound really short of breath. Do you have asthma or medical condition or anything? Or are you just tired?
I'm stressed out.
Just really stressed?
I don't know what's happening.
I just want to clarify before I ask you any questions or you ask me any questions. You said you did understand your rights. You do want to speak with me, correct?
Here's a subtle tactic of reframing hesitation as cooperation. It's gentle manipulation which is done through rhythm and reassurance.
Start, but I don't know. If I start getting overwhelmed, I want somebody to...
You can stop interview at any time.
Okay.
What was your question? You were trying to ask me some questions when we were coming up the stairway.
I don't know what's happening. I don't remember what happened. I remember working this afternoon.
What do you do for Raytheon?
Configurations. So basically I make sure everything's right before it gets released. Drawings or documents or whatever.
I really don't know what Raytheon does. What is it?
Defense, missiles, aerospace.
So are you still employed? Is